Hi there, and welcome to the Follow-Up. We're talking about yesterday's sermon, starting a new series about the Advent. And, 'tis the season for that.
Yes, it is.
And although I have heard pastors start this kind of series in the summer, so it's always interesting. But you mentioned that your plan was to go from Genesis to Revelation yesterday.
Yes.
You only made it about 3/4 of the way through to Galatians. So I have to assume there was some stuff that got cut out.
Yeah, there was a lot. I literally was going to go all the way through, at least the Old Testament was the original plan, and actually read text from everywhere. Because the one thing that I that actually, maybe if I was able to go back, maybe I would put it back in there. I just didn't want it to clutter it up too much, but reading more about Abraham, because Paul mentions Abraham's offspring in Galatians. He mentions that, and he references those things. And so maybe I would have gone back and read a little bit about what's going on there. But I think it was, and I said it in the sermon, and I thought it was absolutely true. We're about to do Galatians in the spring.
Yeah.
And so we'll cover that when we get there in the spring. And so we will cover it. And so I maybe intentionally left it out because I was thinking, okay, we're gonna get there. We're gonna be there later on. But maybe if I went back, maybe I might have read a little bit of it, only to maybe help to connect the two, because we started in Genesis, and I mentioned a few things from the Old Testament, but it's chock full of prophets and God himself. In a conversation with Abram, he starts talking about Abram's offspring, and by the time you get to Galatians, he said offspring, not offsprings, plural, and he's talking about Jesus, and it leads him to the text we were in Galatians 3 and 4. It leads him up to that point. And so, but that was the other reason why I kind of left it out, because then we would have had to go a little bit further up in Galatians, and we just simply didn't have time for that all in one sermon to really get to what we wanted to land on, and that was God said that this was going to happen, and he was going to make things right through his son, and that time was going to come, and it was going to be the fullness of time, and he was going to send Jesus, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he could redeem us, who was under the law, and then adopt us. And that really, I wanted us to get around that idea, and I felt like if we did too much of the conversation with Abram, in places like Genesis 12, Genesis 17, if we went too much into some of that, we would get a little bit lost in it, because then I would have had to unpack a lot more of the book of Galatians. And then I also did that with all the other texts in the scriptures that really point to specifically the birth of Christ. And there's several. Isaiah does it a lot. Malachi does it. There's a text in Zephaniah that's going to point to, so it's all over the place, and I was going to try to touch on every single one of those, just to try to say this has been a theme, and all of them point to not just, there's plenty of texts in the Old Testament that point us to the moment of Christ's death, which is, obviously crazy important to the gospel, but the birth of Jesus and how this happens is so important to the gospel as well. It's a massive cog in how the gospel works and what's happening, and all of the Old Testament prophets are also communicating to this one particular moment and how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen and where it's going to happen, and they've got so much stuff to say that where they're 800 to 1,000 years before talking about this one particular moment, and God's communicating. So God's saying it. God's communicating it through the prophets, and then it's happening. By the time you get to the New Testament, then it happens, and we see that come to fruition. And so there's a lot of implications to that. So yes, we were going to cover all of that, but I really just felt like I wanted to kind of just leave it with, communicating where the world began, and then going to Galatians and going, this has finally happened. What he said was going to happen has begun. It's shown up on earth, and I think that's the way I want to approach the whole Advent series. This is actually, most people don't know this. This is actually the first time I've ever done a series where it was really geared towards Christmas in the Christmas season. I typically don't necessarily strive hard to make that happen. I don't strive hard to make any sort of holiday references most of the time, for whatever reason. Yeah. Some pastors do that, and I think it's great, and they do a great job at it. And then some of us don't, and I'm just one that doesn't necessarily feel an obligation to make sure that we speak directly to a holiday. Now, usually the Sunday before Christmas, obviously we look at it and we talk about it, but that's maybe the one day that I really strive to do that. Easter, obviously we're geared that way, but even leading up to Easter, I don't feel any obligation to have to talk about the things at Easter. But this is really the first time maybe ever where I said, what I want to do is I want to spend time talking about the birth of Christ and looking at the implications of that. Now, we may be approaching it maybe differently than some do, but I certainly don't think that I'm, I certainly don't think I'm original either in the idea of let's talk about Advent and let's talk about some of these things. I'm not being novel in that, so it's not to say that I'm coming up with something that's totally new. I just think that for us not to just simply walk through some of the main elements of leading up to the birth of Christ, shepherds and wise men and angel with Mary and all of, all the things that lead up to it. We will touch on a few of those things in the series, but I know that others have looked at different things, throughout the scriptures. But I really wanted us to take time to really maybe center our hearts a little bit around the significance of it, that it's far deeper than just thanks for sending Jesus, now let's get to the cross.
Yeah. And that was something you sort of touched on a little bit, the whole idea that, come Easter, we're all like, yeah. And then it's like, oh, Christmas time, it's like, sweet 6 pound, 8 ounce baby Jesus.
Yeah.
But, it's funny. I actually had a thought while you were talking about that. And, of course, me, I'm real big into comic books and superheroes and stuff. And, we always, the whole idea that, Jesus is the greatest superhero. Every superhero's got to have an origin story.
That's right.
But
that's right.
But it really is really important to look at this time as, hey, this is chapter 1 of the gospel.
Yeah.
You don't skip to the end of the book.
Yeah.
You gotta.
The cross scene is so powerful. It is.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. The resurrection is so epic. It's amazing. And the birth of Jesus tends to be the sweet thing that happens. But really, this is God, ripping the timeline open and inserting himself into humanity. If you think about it that way, you go, this is huge. This is a big moment. And I think sometimes we do. I think we tend to, not in a bad way, but I think we just tend to kind of go, yes, he was born, awesome, great, let's celebrate that with some food and give each other gifts, and then let's get to the cross, and then we can really celebrate our salvation. When the birth of Jesus, this incarnation, God in the flesh, when that happens, the glory of God really collides with the earth and collides with humanity, and it's the beginning of the work of the gospel on earth. Now, I have to be very specific, because the gospel has always been the plan, and that was kind of the main idea that we really looked at on Sunday, was this was always the plan. But this moment of Christ being born is the gospel really colliding with us,
And I think the whole idea of this was the plan from the beginning is why you took us to Genesis and looked at that specific verse where God is speaking to the serpent and specifically saying, he will crush your head or bruise your head, or
Yeah.
depending on the
Yeah.
translation. But, and, you know, that's one of the things we were talking about a minute ago. That's something that I bet 99% of people just overlook when they're reading it and realize this is, he is Jesus right here, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, and, you know, as you mentioned before, that same theme is throughout the Old Testament. And, you know, hopefully, as people study their Bible, they begin to notice this. But I mean, you know, it's, you know, chapter 3 of the book, we're already, hey, I'm specifically talking about Jesus right now already. Even though probably even before that, it's he's
definitely
mentioned, but
definitely. But that's maybe the first real direct moment where God is going to specifically go, I'm going to insert my son into humanity. But then he's also telling us how it's going to happen. He's going to be born of a woman.
Yeah.
Like, that's how this is going to happen. So he's telling us way in advance, this is how I've got it planned, and here's how it's going to work. And then he will grow up to crush the...
Not even telling us.
Yeah.
He's telling... It's like handing the playbook to the other team and being like, we're still going to beat you.
This is what's up. You know, this is what's going to happen. This is where it's going to come. And then that's when you see a lot of those correlations throughout the Bible where, you know, we read in Exodus where, you know, they were trying to kill all of the firstborn. Well, we see that correlation later with Herod and trying to kill all of, and so, you know, Jesus early on, him and his family have to escape to Egypt. I mean, you know, so there's a lot of different things that are happening, but we see so much of this, you know, trying to eliminate that, and you just can't, because God in the very beginning said, no, this is going to happen, and God gets his way, you know, and so, but what I love about it is, and then it's so tied to our adoption as sons, as daughters. It's so tied to that, where God says, when that fullness of time came, that's what the text said in Galatians, when that time comes, and the time that he's talking about is he's born of a woman, he's born under the law. When that moment comes, then your adoption is that process is beginning. That's the beginning of that process, and I think that's a really cool connection. You know, that I wanted everybody to kind of feel, and I want them to feel that throughout the whole season of Christmas. You know, I want each and every one of us to really sense the richness of what we're celebrating, you know. So,
well, you know, like we talked about a little before, the cross and the resurrection are such powerful moments that have such a big impact on our lives, but the life of Jesus is super important to us too, and which of course started at birth, and so it is something that we need to study and learn about.
Absolutely, because they're not separate events. All of them are tied. It's all the gospel. It's all leading us to ultimately our redemption and perfection. Perfection, or our us being perfected in Christ, is because of all of these elements. And so you don't really have the power of the cross without the life of Jesus. And so at the death of Jesus has its significance because of the life of Jesus. And the resurrection of Jesus has the significance because of his physical death, his actual death, and that means something. And so and then his ascension, that has its significance because he rose from the dead, and then it's, you know, his return has that significance because he ascended to his rightful throne, and then he's going to return to get his church. So all of those elements are so interconnected, and so this is a good moment, though, for us to really look at one element that gets a little bit disconnected from the reality of the gospel, and it's the birth of Jesus. And so I really thought it was a good opportunity for us to just spend some time, you know, talking about it and looking at the significance of it. So we will look at a few of the actual elements of the actual Christmas story, but we are going to spend some time in some other texts that maybe don't get connected very often with the Christmas story, but that we can look at writers of in the Bible, you know, being led by the Holy Spirit to write some things down that are very significant to the birth of Christ. So we'll look at a few of those as
Well,
well.
the secret is the whole thing's connected.
The whole thing's connected, and so the whole thing is connected, and so you're right. It's we want to see that the whole thing is connected, and it's all leading us to a place where Jesus splits the clouds and makes all things new. It all is leading to that moment, and the birth of Christ is no different. And so many of the writers in the Bible capture that reality, through the Holy Spirit kind of tying all of that together. We see it come together really nice, and so I think it'll be great, and I think we'll have a good time really kind of settling into it. So
I'm looking forward to seeing where we go with this. And if you missed this week, you can. There's a link on our Facebook right below this. You can go to our website, and the message is on there. And this week, I guess I should say, it's coming back next week too. So part 2. So 10 a.m. here at the church. This week, life groups are back. Just got a couple more weeks
of life groups
for this semester.
Take a break,
so don't miss out. You only got 2 more weeks to kind of get that little group camaraderie together before you're stuck with your family every week. But no, so make that trip to life groups, and then of course Freedom Kids and FLC students are meeting up here during that time too. So there's something for everybody. This Sunday coming up, we've got our holiday meal. So as directed by the pastor, bring a side and a dessert.
That's important.
But come and fellowship with everybody. Just celebrate the season with us. Invite a friend. It's a great opportunity. Food is the best way to get people anywhere.
It's so easy.
So
it's so easy, and they don't have to bring anything.
Oh,
you just tell them to show up.
You just bring enough to cover them too.
Absolutely.
But so that's coming up, and then also One Starry Night is coming up on December 22nd. That's going to be a great event. Again, another great opportunity to invite people. Say, hey, come out, check this thing out, and sometimes it's the foot in the door that you need to get them coming. So. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it, and we will see you all next time.
See you.